After blowing through numerous funding increases from state lawmakers and all sorts of COVID-era federal money, MPS leaders are asking voters to approve another $252 million referendum this spring, and they aren't even really detailing how the money is going to be spent. They're just saying more of the same. We need this money just to maintain our level of student involvement. Meanwhile, MPS leaders ignore calls to downsize and right-size the district first, which now has way more real estate and overhead, like middle management administrators, than a district of this shrinking size would need. Joining me to talk about it is Will Flanders. He is the research director for the Wisconsin Institute for Law and Liberty, and over the years he's done some deep dives into educational and MPS-related issues for Will. Good morning, sir. How are you?
Good morning. Doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Well, thanks for being on. I appreciate it because this is important stuff. We'll talk about some of the fallacies related to this referendum in a minute, but first, I want to highlight a tax calculator that you have developed for taxpayers who are interested in how much this is going to increase their property taxes. If you have a Milwaukee home or a Milwaukee business, if this referendum passes, you've got a tax calculator that could help them calculate how much their taxes would go up. Where can they find that?
Yeah, so it's right on our website, will-law.org. You'll see it right there on the front page. And, you know, you're absolutely right. In this era of high inflation under the Biden administration, we know many families are struggling to pay their bills that they already have, and even, you know, high interest rates on home mortgages. So what we're trying to highlight here is that, you know, for folks in the city of Milwaukee, this is a very real impact on how much you're going to be paying in taxes every year. And there's a sliding scale right there, as you mentioned. For a $300,000 house, we're talking about $650 a year in added costs, and that's a pretty low cost house nowadays. And obviously, as you go up the scale, the tax burden increases significantly.
Right. You know, the generic figure that MPS has been using when it comes to how much this is going to raise yearly property taxes, they say on a $200,000 home it's going to be $432. Well, that's a heck of a hit. And most homes in Milwaukee are going to be they're going to be worth more than $200,000. You also called for full transparency, and here's something I don't think most voters really know or quite get yet. MPS isn't asking for a new one-time expense of $252 million here. This is raising MPS spending by this much every year forever, right?
That's right. This is an in perpetuity increase in your taxes. And when you look at the track record of the district, maybe if this was a district that was doing well and say we just need a little bit more to get over the hump, it's the exact opposite in the case of MPS. We've seen decades of failure. We see proficiency rates that are below 20% in both reading and math, even a few years after the pandemic here. So there's no reason to think that more money is going to make a difference. MPS already has over $18,000 per student. When you look at a single classroom in Milwaukee, there's over $300,000 of value already sitting there. So for taxpayers in the city, I think they should ask the question, what are you doing with the money you already have? And it's obviously not working. No reason to think more money is actually going to help with that.
Well, to that point, we're talking with Will Flanders, who's the research director for the Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty. MPS leaders are saying, look, without this increase in yearly spending, we're going to have to make across-the-board cuts of 13%. We're going to have to slash our central office staff by nearly a third, that funding by nearly a third. Will they, or is this scare tactic?
Yeah, I think you're familiar, right, in the federal debates, right, when the left will always say, oh, it's the low income folks going to be punished first, right, and it's the same thing here. The most sympathetic programs are the things that they say are going to be cut, but it's certainly unclear the extent to which that's the case. And I'd also say, when you look at central office staff, MPS has over 50 staffers just in the building that have no interaction with students. They have over 3,000 staffers that don't work assigned to a particular school. So maybe these cuts are things that actually should be looked at, and maybe they shouldn't be seen as scare tactics, but actually right-sizing the district.
Yeah, let's talk about where the bloat is, and let's talk about that central office staff. Will's figure is that the average pay for these employees is $123,000 a year with $30,000 worth of benefits put on top of that. That is significant. And moreover, I love how you've done your homework here. We have 422 school districts in Wisconsin. Of those, only 35 districts say they have a central office staff or staffers, and only a few. MPS has 52. What can they possibly be doing every day?
Yeah, that's the question, right? And again, I think it's incumbent on Milwaukee taxpayers to ask that question. They have over $1 million budget for communications, and I know it's a large school district, but what are they doing with $1 million in communication staff pay, and all sorts of other things like DEI equity spending and things like that are not directly interacting with students and have questionable benefits for the education of said students.
Where is the bloat at MPS then? I mean, obviously there's central office staff. You can look at this is a district that has been losing students. It still has about 60,000 pupils, but it's not nearly what it once was. And yet we just keep spending more and more on the district. Where is the bloat aside from maybe too big a central staff?
Yeah, so I mean, you're absolutely right. You go back a couple decades, and the district had over 80,000 students. We've lost a significant percentage of that. Some just due to population change, a lot due to the other options that do a better job, like the choice and charter schools. So what we also see is that they're holding on to a lot of these underutilized and vacant buildings. There are many buildings in the district with usage rates of under 50%. They have some other ones that are, over 100%, but the average usage is below 70%. So many of these buildings are being held on to. I don't know if they think there's a huge surge in population coming in the future. Certainly that's not borne out by the numbers. And, rather than, again, asking for more money, they should be looking at what do we do with some of these vacant and underutilized buildings, of which there are quite a few.
Well, yeah, and this is something that I do think most city voters probably know by now, that MPS does have some empty buildings, some excess space. Do you think that they could sell buildings outright, or is this a matter of selling half of a building, renting out half of a building? How would they? Do you have a measure of how much space we're really talking about here that is in excess?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's difficult to assess exactly because they try to use a little smoke and mirrors. When you look at they submit a sheet to the state every year that shows how much vacant space they have, but some of it will say, well, we're planning to use this for spillover from other schools and things like that. So without drilling down, into the school level and seeing what's actually happening on the ground, it can be quite challenging. But I think the reality is, we have this law called the Surplus Property Law on the books. It was passed by the state legislature a few years ago. MPS is supposed to be making these buildings available to choice and charter schools that want to expand. We know over the years they've been very reticent and unwilling to do so. But even if they don't do that, there are property developers in many of these areas that want to make use of these vacant buildings and, make them into apartments and things like that. It can be a one-time infusion of cash to the district, and then they lose the overhead of holding on to that building. So there are a number of options out there for the district in reducing this excess inventory. Yeah,
the left loves to talk about not having enough affordable housing, and a lot of these could be turned into affordable housing in neighborhoods that need affordable housing, you'd think. Other questionable spending that you point to in your report is interesting. Feel free to comment on any of these. You mentioned a couple of them. MPS has spent in the 2023-24 year alone nearly $3.5 million on communications, whatever that means, nearly $1.9 million on advertising, and over $1 million on DEI. That's $6 million of questionable spending over the course of just one school year.
Yeah, absolutely right. Again, as we said earlier, there's no reason to think these programs have a direct positive impact on kids. When you get to the DEI spending, I think there's reason to think that these things can have a negative effect on kids from a lot of the evidence we've seen over the past couple of years. So, yeah, what are they doing with over $3 million in communication spending? It's a key question to ask. It's mostly staff costs, but what are these staff all doing that costs over $3 million? It's a great question. Advertising. Yes, it's a competitive environment in Milwaukee with the choice and charter sectors, but again, should our public schools be spending over $1 million on advertising at the same time they're asking taxpayers to foot the bill for even more spending? I'd say that's an area to look at a cut before you ask taxpayers for even more money.
Hear, hear. Will Flanders, Research Director for the Wisconsin Institute of Law and Liberty, and this is, I'm going to point again to the website, which is what? Will-law.org. Will-law.org. It's got that calculator there. If you own a home or a business in the city of Milwaukee and you want to know how much this referendum is going to add to your yearly property tax bill, and remember, it would be a higher tax bill every year moving forward if this thing passes, you can go there and check it out. And, of course, the referendum is on the April 2nd ballot, so if you're voting early, be sure to seek that out as well. Thanks so much for being on the show. I appreciate it, sir.
Thank you very much. Have a great day.
Will Flanders.